Hello, welcome to everyone who's joined the webinar so far. I'm Laura Broderick from the Building Centre, so just going to do a quick introduction before we get started on the main content. Yes, we've got a few more people joining, so that's good. So numbers are going up, so fantastic that you could listen in today. The webinar, The Mass Timber Strategy and Design, A Vision for the Phoenix, is part of our New Homes and New Ways programme that's all about collaboration and innovation through modern methods of construction. And that's a programme that we at the Building Centre have been co-curating with the Housing Festival, and includes the exhibition in our venue on Store Street in central London, which you're welcome and invited to come and see if you haven't already. That's open as a public exhibition until the 28th of February. We've also been running this webinar series, and we're delighted we've got this one today, and we've got 2 more to follow. And we've also got a fantastic summit, a 2-day conference programme happening in the Building Centre on the 12th and 13th of February. And you can book your tickets for that on the Building Centre's website or on the Housing Festival's website. So yeah, we are very much sort of talking about new housing and looking at solutions to the housing crisis and how that can kind of come into play with materials and the built environment sector coming together to develop new proposals and new options, not just for housing, but good for the planet and good for places in the future. So I think the Phoenix, the site in Lewes that we're going to hear about today, is something that I know especially the architectural community have been following and have got kind of high hopes for in terms of its design and its sustainability. So I'm really pleased that we've got Tom Lewith of New Works and also Andy Tugby today from Human Nature, discussing the timber strategy for it and what it's setting out to achieve and how it's going. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions from you as our audience. The way to put your questions today is through a Q&A chat box that you should see in your webinar screen. And we'll be putting those questions to Tom and to Andy after they've both finished presenting. So we'll have about 10-15 minutes of Tom's presenting, and then same for Andy. And then that Q&A will open as a conversation between myself sort of chairing that and Tom and Andy answering those. So as they are presenting, do think about what you might want to ask. You can start to put your questions into that chat box ready for when the conversation opens to you. So yes, a little bit more about Tom and a little bit more about Andy, but of course they can give you the real facts and the real meat. So Tom Lewith is a chartered architect and the co-founder of New Works. He's passionate about the potential applications of modern methods construction, or MMC, and the lessons it offers. So he'll be sharing some of the projects where he's used various MMC methodologies and options, and sort of talking us through those and how that's applied to his work and collaboration for the Phoenix as well. And then Andy Tugby is the head of sustainable construction at Human Nature, and his background and interest is very much about sustainable materials and circular low carbon construction and design. So we've got 2 fantastic speakers, a fantastic site to hear more about, and hopefully there'll be lots of questions from you, our audience. So I'm going to stop sharing this title screen and invite Tom to come and give his presentation. So thank you, and over to you, Tom.
Thanks, Laura. Yes, hi, I'm Tom Lewith. I'm co-founder of Architecture Practice New Works and our predecessor TDO. So I'm going to talk about our engagement with MMC and the design approach that it demands, and then the opportunities that can actually bring as well, and then how that was relevant to our work on the Phoenix. So the first project I was going to talk about here is Fab House. So this is a timber frame modular housing scheme we designed for Urban Splash, which was built in North Shields in 2018. So the importance that I'd like to talk about here really is about the how important process was to the design, so process-driven design, and really that involved a deep collaboration with the factory design team, which was important because they are sort of knowledgeable about their own factory processes, and each modular factory has different processes and different details about how those modules go together. So our role really with the factory team was not to introduce inefficiencies in how the modules would be put together and the scheme would be built, because efficiency really is how modular schemes become successful, while at the same time drawing out the architecture from the potential that the modular approach offered. So really it was about understanding that process so that we could introduce the architecture into the scheme. So some examples of what I mean by that. The image on the right, you can see the cladding where the ground and first floor meet is a slightly different texture and is offset. So the reason for that is that the two modules, when they come together, is one of the only places where there's some tolerance in how the whole thing sits together. So we decided quite early on with the factory team that the best way to design these elevations was to central line everything. So a whole elevation is central lined rather than corners abutting. So we don't have any four corners meeting, which means that if there is any misalignment, you don't read it on the elevations. But that also meant that we produced quite a sort of unique elevation across the street, because as the building's handed, the central alignment really kind of comes to life. Similarly with the facades, we stepped them out so they're actually quite deep, and the reason for that was that they've been finding in the past that when the services connections were all needing to be made internally, that you'd have a follow-on trade that would enter the building and potentially cause damage, when in fact the modules could be completely factory finished, locked and left on and then put on site. So we introduced all the service connections externally behind quite a deep facade, and the benefit of that architecturally was that we ended up with a nice deep reveals that gave a sense of weight and permanence to the building, which is often something that modular buildings struggle with. And then internally, we were able to explore the other opportunities that sort of precision engineered factory-made homes offers. So the image on the right there, you can see there's it's quite an interesting thing about how modules sit together. So you have a ground and ceiling cassette that forms the module, and then when the next module comes on top, the ceiling cassette of the ground floor module is actually redundant. So rather than cover that ceiling, we pulled all the finishes off and were able to increase the ceiling height by a couple hundred millimeters, and then all this extra detail and floor to ceiling height and fabric is on show, and all of that is possible because the way that the timbers all go together in the factory is so precise anyway that detail exists. And so we did the same thing on the stairs and say, let's not like run any finishes for it. The way that it goes together is so precise and so beautiful that we should just leave all this as a face finished material. So we're able to take advantage of all this fabric detailing in the fabric that was already there, and show that as kind of free detail in the building, which reduced the cost of it, but also really showed off the potential that this sort of high quality factory built housing has. So that all really came from understanding the process and what opportunities that delivered to the design. So another project which taught us a slightly different aspect of opportunities and requirements that MMC has was low-line arches project. So we've built two of them and we're underway with the third at the moment. And really this important lesson we picked up here was around the tension that exists between standardisation and customisation when it comes to MMC, and the sort of natural need to standardise to so that it actually is an efficient approach, but also the need to be able to customise so that as a piece of architecture it can sit on the site and respond to brief. So our brief on this project was to take a series of redundant arches which kind of run out of London Bridge south through Bermondsey, and introduce reusable, demountable, flexible spaces that could be used as workspaces or cultural spaces along the low line. And our response to that was to think about putting spaces within spaces rather than fill up to the edges of the arches, to create those spaces as independent structures that sit within the arches. And that allowed us to really celebrate the power of the space underneath the viaducts by not touching the edges of them. But it also meant that we could take quite an approach that lends itself to MMC, because these structures would be completely independent and could be prefabricated largely. So what we did was basically learn from Nissen sheds, which are sort of interwar metal structures that were kind of half circles, very efficient and really sort of simply made, but really beautiful things, and adapt them for different uses in the arches. So we were able to componentize and pre-manufacture everything that is required to make these spaces, which makes them inherently adaptable and flexible as well. So this is two of the built projects. So you can see in the background there, actually, of the left-hand image, one of those spaces which started out life as a bike store, but is now a workspace. So and in that arch, there's several changes of uses that have occurred since it was built. And the scheme on the right is a cultural centre, or a flexible community space, which has been used for all sorts of functions, from exhibitions to local community gatherings. It's been a polling station. It's been all sorts of things, but it's inherently flexible. So these structures can all be unbolted, taken apart, and moved to a new arch and leave the arch in its a kind of amazing state that it's in at the moment. So these sort of learnings that we've picked up actually is now published in a good practice guide, which it's just free to download, or if anyone wants a copy, I'm happy just to ping it over if you send me an email, but you can also just go to our website, New Works, and go to the resources section, and it's there. But this really shows all the learnings that we picked up from this process and captures it in a single guide, and also how the design can be broken down into a series of really simple components, which you see on the left there. And these are all pre-manufactured kit of parts made from readily accessible materials, most of which you can get from builders merchants, but if nothing complicated in there. So this project, the process was really key, but the componentized approach led us to be able to create flexible, adaptable, customizable space, whilst also being a standardized kit of parts. So that was actually quite important in terms of how we then understood and approached the brief that we were working to with the Phoenix. So this sort of importance of understanding process, and understanding how we can introduce customizable solutions to a standardized system. And those two principles are, I think, where we see the real possibilities and opportunities of modern methods of construction, because it's balancing what MMC wants to be, which is kind of standardized and efficient and repeatable, with what architecturally the possibilities are, which often involve a bit more kind of customization and thinking about how to draw out the architecture from something which wants to be very efficient. So our work with human nature on the Phoenix revolved around the Gale blocks, as you can see on the right, and Andy will talk more about the project in detail in a minute. Our work on the Gale blocks really focused on how do we introduce an MMC solution which is relevant to the site, because it was a high performance, high quality, low impact and mass timber scheme that could be used to take advantage of bio-based materials, and do that in a way that reflected human nature's principles. So human nature's principles include certain key thought processes, such as raw and craft, which is about standardized and customizable sort of balance, strong, robust and adaptable structures, and build and design, which is about understanding how we build and dismantle buildings in order to design them in the first place. So very closely aligned to the idea of thinking about process, which I was talking about earlier, and how we design buildings. And the solution we arrived at is through the series of workshops, was to think about the left-hand image there you can see, which is a series of CLT plates and party walls, and glue lam and LVL columns, which kind of form a skeleton and a rhythm for the building, and then a series of non-load bearing customizable facade cassettes, which are basically plugged in. And those cassettes have a very kind of customizable quality to them. So you can see a bit more detail here. The cassette we arrived at on the left. So, and then the frame that they slot into kind of together on the right. And the important kind of balance that we struck there was that there should be this mass timber frame, which was set the rhythm for the building, and that would be an off-site manufactured solution, which reflected the availability of labour and materials, and also would then set the rhythm for the building, into which these cassettes can be inserted. And those cassettes are inherently sort of crafted and customizable with handmade elements and finishes, which reflects the kind of the detail that often you can lose through MMC buildings. And those can be built in an on-site factory, which again reflects availability of local labour, local materials, Sussex timber, and then be put into the building. So still a pre-manufactured solution, but blending fully off-site with on-site, off-site approaches. So that was how we were able to take the learnings of process-driven and standardised and customisable approaches to MMC and apply them to the Phoenix, which I think Andy's going to talk about in more detail now. So I'll hand over to Andy.
Thank you. So apologies for that. So my name's Andy Tugby. I'm head of sustainable construction at Human Nature. Human Nature is a developer. I always feel a bit like I'm at an AA meeting when I say that. My name's Andy Tugby and I work for a property developer. But we're not the average developer. We're more of a campaign organisation really than a development company. The background of the company is that the CEO and the chairman are ex-CEOs of Greenpeace, and that's the sort of the place that we come from as a company. We're a developer that doesn't often so a lot of developers now claim to promote sustainability, but our approach is slightly different in that we see development as a methodology that you can use to deliver sustainable outcomes, and that through designing places that and we deliver that by designing places that encourage and enable communities to make better choices about the things that have an impact on the climate in their life. And our first project is the Phoenix, which is in Lewes. There's an aerial view of it. It's a relatively derelict brownfield site on the periphery of Lewes. It's been in this kind of state for about the last 10 or 15 years. It's ripe for updating. It's right on the edge of town, and it's prime brownfield site, but you can see it's not without its challenges. It's by the river, next to some green belt, not green belt, some beautiful green fields. But we don't want to expand into the green field, so we feel it's our duty to optimize the usage of that greenfield site. And what we've what we've developed, the Phoenix is a plan to build predominantly residential scheme on the site, which we think makes the most use of the land. Now, as I said, we feel that development is a way to deliver sustainable outcomes, and one of those for us is the way that the buildings are built, which is predominantly what we're here to talk about today. But there are other elements as well. But so we feel as a developer we don't have the right to build in the traditional manner in a way whereby just the embodied carbon of the materials would be enough to wipe out the carbon budget for the whole county, probably. So we feel it's our duty to deliver a project like this in a responsible way. And very quickly, I won't stay on this, but some of the numbers around the Phoenix. So we're delivering 685 homes, of which 30% will be affordable. There's a bunch of jobs, loads of money in the local economy, and crucially, we're also the fact that we're delivering and we're developing at this scale. It allows us to do quite a lot of things that smaller scale development doesn't allow you to do. So, for instance, we can address the other issues around sustainability. So we can address how and how people get their energy and their heat, and we can also look at how they get around. So our co-mobility strategy is probably for another presentation, but it's equally important to us, as is the way that the buildings are built, so that we can promote kind of shared convivial lifestyle with focuses on localism and circularity. So the site was previously it's an industrial site. So it's the Phoenix Ironworks was on site. It's called the Phoenix. It's not a marketing gimmick. That's the name of the site. It was the name of the Ironworks previously. And so our aim is to kind of retain some of that heritage through materiality and through the retention of some of the buildings. So, for instance, the fact that they made a lot of the iron and the steel here that makes some of the buildings themselves, then if we can retain that or reuse that on site, then that's not only a great story, but it's true circularity, we think. And so much of the building stock is not in particularly good condition. It's not really usable as buildings. So our approach to buildings is that if if we can't keep the building itself, then we will reclaim as much of the materials as we can in order to put back into the economy. So we've got a strategy for reusing all the steel and reclaiming and reusing all the bricks. The asbestos roof's obviously something that's much more difficult to reuse. But when there's a building that is in good condition, so we have one of our buildings, we plan to repurpose that as a community. There are 2 or 3 buildings that we're keeping on site. So they'll be repurposed and reused for community uses. Obviously, the structure will be retained, but the skin will probably be upgraded to kind of sort of 21st century materials. And in terms of the new build, so this doesn't want to switch to the next slide. So there you go. So so predominantly the scheme is new build. We're designing to what we call a gentle density. So that's a scale that makes most use of and maximizes the potential of a brownfield site, while also retaining a sort of human scale. So we think 5 stories is quite a good size. So Tom mentioned before the Gale block. So this is a block. It's a courtyard block, which draws heavily on the influence of Jan Gehl, the urban designer who arguably has designed the most effective and most successful community building courtyard blocks in Copenhagen. So we've blatantly nicked all the best bits and designed to build a couple of courtyard blocks that take the best learning and design and show those buildings in a kind of 21st century model. But the thing is that Tom started to talk about is how we construct those buildings. Now Tom made a much more eloquent assessment of that than I would be able to. So I'm not going to go too much into the detail, but we did carry out an exercise where we worked out how we would build the courtyard blocks. And what we've discovered since is there is a scale at which the system that Tom mentioned is more appropriate. And when you're building a larger scale, so these courtyard blocks are a sort of 100 and 120 unit in total, 5 stories. So when you're working at that scale, then that mass timber structure with the wall cassette panels is a good is the optimum solution. In the blocks that are slightly smaller scale, so the drawing on the left is a block. It's a section from Parcel 1, which is the first block that we're likely to bring forwards, and that's about 45 units. And at that scale, the CLT, the mass timber option, may not become the favored system, but the principle is probably the same, in that you can rather than using mass timber, the Parcel 1 is designed with a more traditional stick frame construction. But again, the principles are the same. You create a skeleton, your superstructure rather of the building is the one that does all the hard work. But in the case of Parcel 1, that's a more traditional stick frame superstructure. And I'll come back to that a little bit in a later slide. But one of the reasons that that's important is we did quite a lot of work with Whitby Wood, and because the thing that's important to us is we're not solely looking at embodied carbon. We look at, obviously we have to look at operational carbon, which we think is pretty much a given these days. You should be able to, anyone should be able to design a building that is pretty much operational net zero. Although again, there's I could do a whole other presentation on that. And obviously the embodied carbon of the material is important, but also so is the material efficiency, which we've discovered that through doing a lot of work with Whitby Wood engineers, that actually a traditional stick frame construction is much more materially efficient than a mass timber frame, and which in turn means that you get a much better embodied carbon figure, because you don't just as long as you're not including sequestration, then it doesn't it's not the case that more timber equals better performance. So it's important to us that the buildings are materially efficient as well as operationally and carbon efficient. And to build a bit on what Tom said about the structure, so the principle being that there will be a skeleton, a superstructure that does the hard work of holding the building up, that allows us to build our external wall cassettes as a system which can be manufactured off-site or near-site or on-site, depending on the conditions. And we can prioritize using bio-based construction throughout. And the important thing with this, I think, to mention is the fact that we've been engaged with fire engineers from the very start of our design process, so that we're certain that what we choose to design is able to be delivered. It also gives us the opportunity to look at where our timber comes from. So we know that with the mass timber, obviously we won't be able to source that from the UK at the moment, but we can if we're building the wall cassette panels ourselves, or we have some control over that. That gives us the agency to decide where our timber comes from, where they're made, and by whom, and it allows us to prioritize local sourcing, local production, and local workforce. And another thing, just to finish, so Tom made the point about standardization and customization being quite key, and obviously one of the main features of the Phoenix, I think, is certainly on Parcel 1, is the quality of the architecture, and it's really important to be able to express that architecture with a sort of fine grain and interest, in order for it to not be standardized boxes. But then at the same time, you also want standardization. So what we've done is we've created what we call the build and design playbook, which Tom touched on briefly, and it sets out a series of principles that get baked in as kind of design guidance for architects, in order to ensure that materiality, so the energy, carbon, and material efficiency is kind of baked in from the start. But and it actually allows quite a lot of design freedom for the architects, while at the same time, obviously maximizing design quality, allowing for fine grain architecture, and maximizing standardization and increased efficiency. Now, and I'll give you an example on here from Parcel 1. One of the principles of the build and design playbook is that for this particular scheme, the party walls are the supporting walls, and the joists span across the party walls. What that does is that allows you to minimize your span lengths, and so you get your material efficiency. It also makes the additional benefit of making the spaces themselves fully customizable and adaptable over the lifespan of the building. So we think over time it will reduce material usage if people want to change and move around the specific design of the spaces within their apartments, and also so as well as that adaptability. So one of the other aspects about that is that if you've got one of the other features of the design and build playbook is that if you have, following the same principle, if you have setbacks on higher floors, then those setbacks have to go from party wall to party wall. So there needs to be full width setbacks, in order, again, to make sure you're not doing any abortive supportive work below. And if you follow those principles, then with a bit of added push-pull, you can create really interesting architecture, which has inherent standardization within it. And so here we see that in practice. So these are some of the sketches of Parcel 1. And by implementing the principles as principles rather than as rules, then it allows the architect the freedom to create something that we think is still really interesting, and what it delivers. So here's a view of of Parcel 1 as it's seen, and that block of interest is actually based on only 5 building typologies over a block of 45 dwellings. So and there you see it from the river, from the footbridge, looking back along the river, the Phoenix from the corner. So I'm going to stop there.
Thanks, Andy. And Tom, if you're able to come back on, that would be fantastic. And such a good image to end with, that sort of vision of looking at the site. I mean, it's very sort of powerful and evocative, isn't it, as a kind of a new place. So thank you for sharing the presentations and ending on that note. And so just a reminder to anybody watching, you can put your questions to Andy and Tom in the Q&A chat box. So please do. And if you want to address it to a particular person, please put Andy's name or Tom's name, so I know then who to fire it towards. But just to get started, you obviously both talked a lot about that kind of play around standardisation and customisation. And you also both talked about guidance rather than necessarily set rules, but that being useful. With that good practice guide, Tom, that you said new works had produced for another project, and then obviously the design and build playbook for this particular Phoenix site, how do you feel that open source knowledge or that sort of setting of principles will help with new housing and will help us do better, I suppose? Like, I suppose, just do you have any kind of thoughts on that?
Which yeah,
Don't know.
I can
Yeah.
go quickly first, if that's all right. Yeah. So the good practice guide we talked about was actually obviously it's not a housing project, but it's sort of how do we the purpose of it really was to capture like all our learning in how to apply what's essentially an MMC project to a site that you wouldn't sort of necessarily go to with it.
Yeah.
And then what the kind of edges of that look like and the constraints and opportunities, and then just sort of handing all that over really. I suppose like it's not the purpose of that document is less about how do you replicate what we've done. It's more intended as a document that sort of does a lot of that, covers a lot of that groundwork to start off with. Like what are the kind of issues you're going to face and how might you overcome them. And I think like from the perspective of trying to get MMC more widely adopted, it can be difficult because I suppose like from our experience, almost every client wants to explore it, but there's so many exit points along the way to actually committing to doing it and actually building in that way that one of our motivations there is like how do we overcome that, or how do we like flag those in it straight up and start to sort of engage them at a really early point. And I know that Andy mentioned about working with fire engineers really early on, and it's obviously critical with mass timber, especially with resi, that's something that happens. But yeah, with the railway arches, there's infinite issues there that fall outside of the usual statutory challenges because it's not normally much of a planning issue, but it definitely is a freeholder like license to alter issue that you're going to encounter, and it's not really like whether there's a problem, but it is the fact that we've got a massive piece of infrastructure going overhead that you need to be kind of mindful of. So there are these kind of quite sort of idiosyncratic constraints that you sort of come up against on in that case, that we felt like actually if we've gone through this, we should capture it and share it, and then hopefully the opportunity to not abandon an MMC approach is one that can be taken.
Yeah, and was that on your practice's own time then to do that good practice guide? Were you very much
So they were part of the client's commission. Yeah, so it was for the low-line partners who have like a kind of an agenda to really promote cultural and community hubs along the viaduct, and they commissioned the project and really wanted to be able to share any learnings that came out of it, which has been a really kind of positive thing.
Yeah. And Andy, what about you, just on that sort of point of the playbook and sharing knowledge and guidance?
Yeah, I think I think that so it's our we really believe in open sourcing as much as possible. I mean, we haven't like I said about the Gill block, we've taken inspiration from everywhere. You know, we pride ourselves that we haven't invented anything at the Phoenix. We've just kind of curated a lot of the best practice that's out there already. And in terms of the learnings of the building design playbook, there's not a lot in it that isn't somewhere else. Not that we've taken it from somewhere else, but you know, that having kind of written it and then looked outside at other publications, there's bits and pieces of it all over the place, and we've kind of obviously there's quite a lot of original work that was done by Whitby Woods as the research behind it, but the principles of how to are not that difficult to get your hands on already, I think. But so we would be really keen to open source our build and design playbook once we've refined it and kind of specificized it, if you like, that's a word. But because it's important, right? The important thing to us is that this becomes this becomes standard practice. You know, it shouldn't be that it's difficult to work out how to. You know, the how to should be the easy bit, and in our experience, the how to is, from what we found, is fairly the easy bit. The difficult bit is the will to.
Yeah.
Which
the hearts and minds bit.
Which is part of the reason we are a developer, is because that gives we have the choice, because it's our project and we choose where we draw our red lines.
Great, super interesting. Thank you both. Okay, so some questions have started to come in, but keep them coming. So 2 questions from John Spencer here. What is the build program? Is the first one. And the second, the wall cassettes sitting on party walls, how is fire dealt with? Obviously you talked about fire being the fire strategy being super important. Do you want to take one each? What should we do? Do it that way.
So I can take
Both?
I'll take both of them or
Yeah,
either
go
or.
on then, Andy.
So the build program is it's quite a big project. It's an 8 to 10 year build. We've got probably 6 months before we start work, and then it'll be a year and a half of enabling works, and then 8 years of building construction after that. Thereabouts. That's the sort of build program. Well, Tom, do you want to do the fire and external walls?
Yeah, I mean the height of the building is the buildings were deliberately and consciously below sort of 18 and the 18 meters. The kind of principles that we established there about frame and cassettes was really about the balance between availability of materials and labor and where the best place to source different elements from and how do we kind of shape that into an architecture without being quite too specific about what that architecture ends up being. So those are sort of guiding principles, and then the sort of details around fire breaks and so on are then applied on top of that. So it's not sort of or in addition to it, it's not a sort of although the diagram's deliberately quite basic, just showing a square going onto an elevation. Obviously, there's more detail to it than that, but they dealt with fire breaks in a conventional manner, basically.
Yeah, I think the answer is that dealt with by appropriate details, accredited by an appropriate fire consultant.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Great.
that's the boring answer.
Well, essential, right? So another question from Alessandro here. First of all, thanking you for your fantastic presentations. Where can we find the playbook? The playbook's not currently published, I think, as you were saying, Andy, it's not open source yet. But the good practice guide that Tom referenced, that is on your website, you said. So the next bit of his question, regarding the design, could you please give us info regarding the sound mitigation into the timber construction? I'm assuming that's the mass timber, which is obviously not from the UK, but sourced elsewhere. I'm assuming that's the direction of the question, but maybe it is the local timber as well. Yeah, just say more about the timber.
So if I can take this one, so just to say, I mean, it's a bit of a cop out really, but we've got outline planning for the whole site. The building isn't designed to that level of detail yet. There are countless solutions for soundproofing mass timber construction. We can happily point you. There's a really good so there's a website called Massive Holts, which has got really good standard details of mass timber, kind of robust details almost. If you're really interested, it can show. It's a really good how-to. Really, there's loads of different options. It's a really interesting place to look at. I can share the link if anyone's interested.
Yeah, could you say the name of it again, Andy, in case people didn't catch it, because it sounded.
I think it's Austrian. It's Massive Holts.
Okay.
So I'll put the link in the thing.
Yeah, if you can put it in the chat, that would be amazing. Yep. Thank you, Andy. And Tom, is that something you've come across obviously in other projects, because this isn't at the point of being able to answer it in any detail for this one, but something you've come across?
Yes, it's sort of, I mean, acoustics obviously is a kind of a sort of challenging subject on any project, but it basically comes down to a lot of the time down to sort of mass and weight, and that kind of is something that timber kind of for other reasons is good, doesn't offer to the same extent. So it really depends on what the whether it's we're talking about CLT floor plates or the sort of like joisted solutions that Andy was talking about as well. But it can, and also there's fast separation to consider as well. But yeah, it's not an easy one. The short answer is sometimes it'll just come down to using a screed to give it that kind of density, which is suboptimal, but kind of part of life, unfortunately.
Part of that materials and embodied carbon that just needs to be used. Yeah. Okay, great. And then within the development, I was wondering, maybe it's not at this point, but what is the mix of tenureship around sort of private ownership, some affordable, some social rent? How does that play out across the site, Andy?
So it's like I said, it's 30% affordable, some of which are actually affordable. So we've adopted what's called the Lewis low cost housing standard, which is a pricing linked to the average wage in Lewis.
Okay.
So that and it's yeah, so 30%, which accounts for I think 200 and something, 220 homes, which is the most affordable housing delivered in a national park in one go ever, I think. Certainly in the South Downs National Park.
Well, that's impressive and reassuring for,
yeah.
Mm. And on that level of sort of, because I know I saw online, and obviously the person asking this question must have seen that there was a lot of community events. So could you say a little bit more about that community engagement process and how you developed that?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, we've engaged with the Lewis is a particular kind of place. It's got a group for everything, and we seem to. I think we've met all of them over the last few years. So we've engaged with over 200 different community groups.
Yeah.
And we've spent a lot of time. We had a design festival that was attended by 2,000 people. We had a public exhibition, which was also really well attended over a weekend. And we host a whole series of meanwhile events in order to kind of not lose to bring a bit of life back to the industrial estate, so that it doesn't just sterilize and become completely derelict. And yeah, to the point where when we went to committee, there were 100 people demonstrating outside the planning committee in favour of the development.
Fantastic.
Which it doesn't happen. It's never happened in my experience.
Yeah, it's nice for demos to be flipped in that way, right? So that's great.
Well, one thing I just quickly add, I can't take any credit for it at all, but the design access statement for the project is amazing, and it's got to be the best design access statement I've seen. But it goes into lots of detail on this subject. It's a really interesting document, and in itself like an amazing resource, which I think would answer a lot of the questions.
Yeah, I'll pop the link to that in the chat as well.
Great, amazing. Well, thank you both. Excellent presentations and discussion afterwards. So appreciate you giving your time to support the New Homes and New Ways programme by the Building Centre and the Housing Festival. And thank you everyone for attending, and for those of you who asked questions, that's much appreciated. We do have 2 more webinars coming up, one on the 6th of February and another at the end of February. So if you want to join those, you can book for free for those lunchtime webinars. And just a reminder, the exhibition is open Monday to Friday in the Building Centre on Store Street, Central London, and the summit days are the 12th and 13th of February, and you can get your tickets for those. So yeah, just final goodbye from all of us, and thanks everyone for being involved today. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.